This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Now, for many of us here in the UK, it seems like it's getting harder to reach the major milestones of adulthood. At the same time in our lives when our parents and grandparents would have been setting up their adult lives, buying their first home and having children, we're still renting property and getting frustrated over the increase in our Netflix subscription. In the world of politics, this is known as a generational divide, and the data shows that in many areas, this divide is getting worse as time goes on. The thing is, there might actually be something else going on here. People in their 20s are still buying houses and having children, just not everyone. With the help of parents, people are still able to buy a house, settle down, and have children, and data shows that more and more people are leaning on parents to do exactly this. Perhaps then the divide isn't so much generational as it is class-based, with the expectation of inheritance the key differentiating factor between the haves and have-nots. So in this video, we're going to have a look at exactly this, looking first at the generational divide in the UK, before moving on and having a look at how class factors into it. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, when the generational divide is explained, it usually refers to three key elements: education, employment, and housing. In terms of education, it's relatively hard to compare how different generations have fared, as there haven't really been any major studies of this across generations. What we can observe, though, quite clearly is the increased cost of education. University used to be a lot more selective than it is today, and for years it was just free. Tuition fees, which were first introduced in 1998, were £1,000 a year and were means tested. In 2004, they were tripled to £3,000 a year and the means testing was dropped. In 2012, this was tripled again to £9,000 a year. The thing was, this all happened as the number of high-skilled jobs requiring a degree rose. In 1990, just over 30% of high-skilled jobs required a degree. By 2020, this increased hugely to 55% of high-skilled jobs. The point is, while we can't say that education has gotten worse over the years, it certainly has gotten more expensive and more essential for a relatively well-paid job. In terms of employment, there's also economic data to suggest that the younger generation may be getting a worse deal than the older generation. Now, while it's true that unemployment has been declining, and therefore more people are in work than previously, this hasn't been accompanied by higher pay. Millennials born in the late 1980s earned about 8% less at age 30 than their counterparts from Generation X when they were 30. In other parts of the world, some progress has been made since the 2008 financial crisis. The US, for example, has seen pay growth, especially for younger workers. Here in the UK, though, the typical weekly pay of graduates aged 30 to 34 has fallen by 16% between 2007 and 2023. There was a decline of 6% for non-graduates. Now, while both education and employment are certainly a factor in the generational divide, they're the lesser factors. Far, far more important is the issue of housing. Purchasing your own home is probably one of the largest and costliest decisions that you'll make as an adult. However, it's also one of the most financially advantageous. No longer are you throwing money away to a landlord, you're investing in an asset that, historically speaking, reliably appreciates in value. In essence, the sooner you get onto the property ladder, the sooner you're financially secure. It should come as a surprise to no one, though, that getting on the housing ladder has become harder and harder over time. Now, one of the best ways to look at the affordability of housing is looking at how much the average house costs as a multiple of average earnings. As of 2022, the average house in the UK cost 9 times average earnings. This is a huge increase since the early 1990s, when houses were just over 4 times average earnings. In fact, the last time the multiple was this high was in 1876, almost 150 years ago. The knock-on effect of this is that fewer younger people are able to afford houses, and in the last 3 decades, we've seen a steady decline in home ownership among younger people. Evidently then, it's gotten harder for younger people to buy a property, making it harder for them to acquire an asset, and making them, on the whole, poorer than their parents were at their age. Taken together, this all implies that the big divide in British politics is generational, between wealthy older people who enjoy solid wages and their own homes, and poorer younger ones who are stuck renting with expensive post-grad degrees. However, this might not actually be the right framing. In fact, when you dig into it a bit, this generational divide begins to look a lot like the classic British class divide, between rich families and poor families. This is essentially thanks to the growing role of the so-called Bank of Mum and Dad. It's increasingly clear that there's a divide within the younger generations, between the haves and have-nots, between those that can rely on the Bank of Mum and Dad and those that cannot. What actually seems to be happening is that as houses have become less and less affordable, it's become more and more important to have parents that can help you get onto the property ladder. The effect of this is entrenching inequality and making upward mobility harder and harder. The best way of demonstrating this is by looking within the current generation and breaking down the overall home ownership figures. Among those whose parents bought a house early in adulthood, 58% of 35-year-olds have been able to buy a house. Among those whose parents didn't, only 27% have. This actually shouldn't be all that surprising though. Ever since the 1970s, more and more people have had to rely on their parents in order to buy a house. In 1975, a mere 6% of first-time buyers relied on parental wealth for their purchase, and only 1% had their parents pay for or gift the entire property. By 2020, 30% of first-time buyers relied on parental wealth, and 5% had their parents buy the property. The point is, despite the increasing barriers to home ownership, more and more people are simply leaning on mum and dad more. For those that aren't able to, the barrier is just getting bigger and bigger. According to John Byrne-Murdoch's own analysis, a 35-year-old with parents who don't own their own home, and are therefore likely not terribly wealthy, needs to earn around £25,000 more than someone with wealthier parents to have the same opportunity to buy a house. Sure, the generational divide certainly plays into all this, but it seems that actually the much more relevant divide in the UK is within generations, between social classes. As you've hopefully realised after watching an 8-minute video explaining both the generational divide and the class divide in the UK, you'll have noticed that here at TLDR News, we're committed to helping you learn. Fortunately, the sponsor of today's video shares this commitment and is one of the best websites on the internet to help you learn new skills from the ground up. That website is, you guessed it, Brilliant. Now, one of the best things about Brilliant is, rather than simply throwing information at you and testing you on it, Brilliant teaches you by doing. Each of their lessons is filled with hands-on activities in problem solving that helps you actually play with the concepts. This is proven to be 6 times more effective than simply watching lecture videos. And what's more, Brilliant actually helps you do all of this learning wherever you are. You can complete their lessons on your phone, so you can easily utilise any spare minutes you have in the day with actually worthwhile learning. You can try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, so click on the link in the description. That way you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks for watching the video, and thanks for Brilliant for supporting this video.